Expect to pay more for electricity and gas starting tomorrow as tariffs for both are going up for the next 3 months. Singapore home loan rates crossed the 3% mark, hitting a new high since 2019. And with Ferdinand Marcos Jr. sworn in as the Philippines' new president today, it marks a return for his family after 36 years. This is The Big Story with me, Olivia Quay. Remember to subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss an episode. If your home uses electricity from grid operator SP Group, your bills will be higher for the next 3 months. SP Group announcing today that the electricity tariff for the next quarter will be going up by about 8% to 30.17 cents per kilowatt hour before GST. Well, let's take a look at how much more households will have to pay from July. For instance, looking at HDBs, SP Group notes that households living in a 4-room flat can expect their average monthly electricity bill to go up by $8.25, excluding GST, and almost $6 for those in a 3-room unit. Meanwhile, producer and retailer of piped town gas, City Energy, is also raising the gas tariff for households to 23.09 cents per kilowatt hour before GST, a price hike of 6.6%. This will be in effect from July 1st to September the 30th. Both SP Group and City Energy say the price increments are due to higher fuel costs. With more is Dr. David Broadstock. He's a senior research fellow at NUS's Energy Studies Institute. So, Dr. Broadstock, the electricity tariff has been rising since April 2021. For how long can we expect this upward trend to continue?
This is a very good question. Thank you. We have seen the electricity prices increasing for some time now, and many of us want to know, when will this stop? And there are several pointers we can look towards. The recent announcement, today's announcement, tells us quite clearly how oil prices are connected to the rising electricity prices. Oil prices are currently sitting at a point where they're hovering between $110 to $120 per barrel. And historically speaking, we do not really see oil prices go above this. There's been a few instances, generally short-lived. So on the basis, at least, of the history of those oil prices, we can be reasonably optimistic that we should not be seeing much more of an increase in prices. Although, of course, it's not at all impossible that we might see a new future for oil prices that we just haven't had in the past. At the same time, we can see that the costs of producing electricity locally are beginning to decline in recent months. Not enough to cause the tariff to be able to decrease just yet, but it's a very positive marker when thinking about the next quarter ahead, that oil prices can't go up further and domestic power generation prices seem to have stabilized, if not begun to decrease. And so I'm optimistic that within the next 3 to 6 months, we should, at the very least, stop seeing these large increases in the tariff rates and hopefully begin to see some receding towards levels that we've seen in the past.
Well, Dr. Broadstock, it's not just our high electricity bills that are, getting higher. The households will have to pay more for gas as well. So how can all of us manage these rising costs?
This is a very important question. And at the point in time we're in today, it's not necessarily very easy to know precisely what we can do. We've seen 6 months of very high sustained prices. They're impacting electricity and gas. Business consumers have been impacted and the government has set out support schemes for them. Households have been impacted and the government has set out support schemes for them too. And so many households will already be doing many of the things they can, but all of us can still find opportunities to check and see where we can save energy. All of our households may have lights that we're leaving on 10 or 20 minutes more than we need to. And we should try to save energy where we can and turn these off. Of course, cooling is one of the most energy intensive activities within the home. So if we can set the air conditioning temperatures a little higher, that can make a difference.
Well, many thanks to Dr. David Broadstock from the Energy Studies Institute at NUS. Well, let's build on Dr. Broadstock's advice. Here are some other tips on how you can save energy. Use a fan instead of an air conditioner and turn off standby power sockets. You should also adjust the temperature of your refrigerator to the recommended setting. Overcooling the refrigerator uses more energy and in turn wastes electricity. Home loan rates in Singapore have gone past 3% to a new high, with UOB's latest move to raise its rates. The previous high was 2.88% in mid-2019. While UOB's 3-year fixed-rate package is now at 3.08% per annum, up from 2.8% previously. The bank also raised its 2-year fixed-rate package to 2.98% per annum from 2.65%. There's no change to its floating rate package though, which is pegged to the Singapore overnight rate average. This follows DBS this week, raising rates on all its home loan packages. Meanwhile, a tighter vehicular emissions scheme will be in place from 2024 when the thresholds for the various pollutant levels in the scheme will be lowered. The scheme itself is continuing for another year until end 2023. There will be no change to the scheme rebate until December 31st, 2023, and likewise for the scheme surcharge until December 31st, 2025. Singapore will soon be able to receive chicken from Indonesia after it was approved as a new source from which Singapore can import frozen, chilled and processed chicken meat. Minister for Sustainability and the Environment Grace Fu says adding Indonesia to Singapore's list of 20 accredited countries is another step forward for our efforts to diversify sources and enhance the resilience of our food supply. Following a landslide victory in last month's elections, Ferdinand Marcos Jr was sworn in as the Philippines' president earlier today. And in his inaugural speech, he doubled down on the legacy of his dictator father, which critics describe as a dark period of human rights abuses and corruption.
I once knew a man who saw what little had been achieved since independence, in a land of people with the greatest potential for achievement, and yet they were poor. But he got it done, sometimes with the needed support, sometimes without. So will it be with his son. You will get no excuses from me.
In a 30-minute speech that echoed his campaign slogans of unity, Mr. Marcos Jr pledged education reforms, waste management and energy supply, and to give full support for millions of overseas Filipino workers. Here's our Philippines correspondent with more.
Today, we witnessed the conclusion of the epic return to power of the Marcoses, 36 years after they fled the Philippines in shame. As I was watching Mr. Ferdinand Marcos Jr being sworn in as president, I couldn't help but draw a mirror image from 36 years ago, on February 25, 1986. On that day, Mr. Marcos Jr., only 28 and wearing a fatigue, was standing on the balcony of Malacanang Palace, the seat of government, with his father, mother, and 2 sisters. And they were defiant as a coup and as a popular uprising was swirling around them. Today, I saw Mr. Marcos triumphant, being sworn in as the Philippines' 17th president. Now, whether he intends to rule like his father or to pick up where his father left, I don't think that will be the case. I think he will be more a continuity of his predecessor, Mr. Rodrigo Duterte. Now, what does that mean? No? If carrying on Mr. Duterte's legacy also means inheriting the same baggage he will be leaving behind. Mr. Duterte is leaving over $300 billion worth of debt. Most of that money was borrowed to finance his pandemic response. While we are all hoping that Mr. Marcos Jr. will not be as brutal, will not have the same kleptocratic tendencies as his father. We do hope that he will display some of the political genius that his father admittedly had when he was president, because I think he will need that to pull off a miracle and get the Philippines out of the predicament that it is in right now.
Elsewhere, Chinese President Xi Jinping is in Hong Kong for a two-day visit to mark the 25th anniversary of the city's return to Chinese rule. He and his wife arrived about 2 hours ago at Hong Kong's West Kowloon Station through the express rail link from Shenzhen, and they were greeted by incumbent Chief Executive Carrie Lam. This is the first time since the pandemic that Mr. Xi is stepping outside mainland China. And in sports, Singapore football legend Fandi Ahmad is calling time on his stint with the Football Association of Singapore. After spending 7 years with the association, the 60-year-old will leave following the completion of his contract as the head of elite youth. FAS says the decision was mutual after Fandi expressed his intention of spending more time with his family. Well, those are our top stories today. Visit straitstimes.com for more news and our YouTube channel for more videos. Subscribe by hitting the red button below. I'm Olivia Quay, and I'll see you tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.